Hey Tubies, Freak Phil here with my first class on my new computer. I'm right here at the Grove on the edge of our classroom, which I won't show you right now because it's a kind of becomes a storage room when it's not being used for a classroom. So in between classes, it's a mess. But I spent so much time teaching in this chair, just faced that way instead of this way. I figured it'd be a great place for my next rant. This rant is more important than all the rants, I think. It's about the statement of intent. A statement of intent is probably the most important part of any spell. Every spell requires a statement of intent, requires you to have clearly laid out in language what you want to occur. Precise speech leads to precise thought. When you have those words precisely in your mind, formulated into words, then they are a pure thought, a formulated thought, a thought that's ready for manifestation. Typically, it sounds something like, I will a thing to be, and then the thing, so mote it be. Whenever you hear that in a spell, in a book, or somewhere out there in the world, that's the statement of intent. Statement of intent often is the words right before so mote it be. So you've heard a statement of intent if you've been doing any kind of witchcraft, any kind of Wicca, any kind of occultism. It comes up a lot. But I find this little story illustrates the importance of the statement of intent better than all my other teaching materials, and I'll try and get it done in as much time as I can. Sometime in the mid-'80s, a student of mine came to me and he forced upon me, against my will, this thing called a computer. It wasn't quite a computer yet, it was called a dumb terminal, and it attached to this thing called a modem. And this modem attached through the phone to something similar to the internet, but we did not have an internet yet. It was called a BBS system. My student, unbeknownst to me, had gone out and created something called the Wunderland Pagan Information Network, where pagans all over the country and in England and a couple other places around the world were able to communicate with each other, send emails to each other. It took like 3 days for emails to travel across the country, so they were slower than snail mail. And you could post opinions, share ideas, kind of stuff that's become passé in our world. We do it all the time. We take it for granted, but back in the 80s, this was a new thing, and there was hardly anybody on it. But these pagans, able to communicate from their living rooms, from their houses, it was this brand new thing for us. We hadn't been able to communicate with our own people for quite some time, except in person, little gatherings when it's safe and whatnot. So I got to make this rant under 10 minutes, so I'll try and tell the story quick enough. It was a fascinating thing being able to communicate with all these pagans. But after just a few days of this, I realized why I'd been shown this and why it was so important, because this thing called the Gulf War happened. Do you remember the Gulf War? Gulf War I, it was over in about a week, so you had to really be paying attention to have seen the Gulf War. So Gulf War I happened. It was only lasted about a week, but right away, all of the witches, pagans, and we probably used the term Wiccan more often back then, they all didn't want a war. They could agree on that. Somebody came up with a bright idea to do a magic to stop a war. And they said that they had a magic that their family had used back in merry old England to stop a war, to stop Hitler from landing in England, something based on that. And that they were going to do a spell on this particular day that just happened to be figured out to be a really good day to do a magic for stopping a war. Immediately, pagans all over jumped on the bandwagon. The responses were, yeah, my coven's going to do that too. We're going to work at that particular time for that particular thing. Solitaire is going to work, and all these people responded, everybody's going to do it. It was a big thing at the time. Then came the statement of intent, and the arguing back and forth about the statement of intent, the peeling apart of the statement of intent, and the watering down of the statement of intent, until everybody could be happy, till consensus could be reached upon this statement of intent across a broad spectrum of pagans with very different beliefs. And I remember it well. The statement of intent that was finally used was pretty much the exact words as I recall. Stop the war quickly. So mote it be. That was all anybody could agree on. Even a casual student of recent history, in this portion of history, will have to note that although the war itself, or what was declared a war, ended in about a week, the bombings, the sanctions, the starving of the Iraqi people, the no-fly zones, these things continued all the way up until Gulf War II. These things continued so long that they were not news anymore. When they were news, they were printed way in the back page. Oh yeah, so something else got bombed in Iraq this week, buried in the back pages of the paper. So while it may be said that the witches of not so old ago did a very powerful thing back in the 80s to do a magic to stop a war, we can see where the statement of intent went a little off. And we can see the result of that. Hindsight's 2020. I have found that this particular story is very powerful in illustrating the importance of statements of intent. And I tell this story so often that I figure I should just tell it here for the pagan world, or for the world, but especially for the pagans, because they'll understand. So get your statement of intent down clearly. Don't make it namby-pamby. Be careful of too many things, like, if it be for the greater good and that kind of thing. Those are great, nice, noble things to do, but unless you're an adept magician, you're going to be nullifying 75% of your spells. And unless you've got really, really good confidence, then you're going to lose your confidence. So state clearly what you want and think about what you don't want, and either have a way in there in the language of binding down the thing you don't want, like typically in Wicca, we hear it pretty often, and it harm none, so mote it be. So that's the binding down of the action not wanted portion of their statement of intent. I'll just give you some ideas. I can go on longer about it, but I only got 10 minutes at a time on YouTube to make my point, and I hope history has made my point for me. Until next time, kids. Merry party.